Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for joining us for the November installment of ILA's Leadership Perspectives webinar series. I am Susan Madsen, Orrin R. Woodbury Professor of Leadership and Ethics in the Woodbury School of Business at Utah Valley University, and I will be moderating this webinar with Margaret J. Wheatley, well-known writer, teacher, and speaker, and someone I've known for a number of years and have admired her for many years as well. Before we start, please note the following. First, this webinar will be archived, so if you missed something and would like to hear the webinar again or just see the presentation again, they will be published to the ILA website within 24 hours. You will receive an email with instructions for accessing the archived recording after the webinar has ended. Second, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. At any time, you may ask questions by typing them into the question box of your webinar control panel, which is located and it's displayed on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll address your questions during the second half of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Meg writes, teaches, and speaks about how we might accomplish our work, sustain our relationships, and willingly step forward to serve in this troubling time. She works from the belief that whatever the problem, community is the answer. Meg has been an organizational consultant and researcher since 1973 and also a dedicated global citizen since her youth. She's been an associate professor of management at the Marriott School of Management, BYU, and Cambridge College, Massachusetts. And in 2010, Meg published Perseverance, a personal guide for those who seek to persevere, those who hope that their life and work contribute to make things better for people, issues, and places they love. And as most of you know, Peg has published a number of books, including Leadership in the New Science, Turning to One Another, Simple Conversations to Restore Hope to the Future, A Simpler Way, and also Finding Our Way, Leadership for an Uncertain Time. So there's much more I could say about Meg, but I'll let you read additional details online so we can let her get started. We are fortunate to have Meg with us today to speak on perseverance and inquire into how we sustain our capability to serve, or our capacity to serve, sorry about that. Thanks so much for joining us today. Meg?
Well, I'm delighted to join everyone who's listening in. We have 12 countries which are represented, which always makes me extremely happy. I think I've been to most of the countries, looking at a quick list of who's listening. And I'm especially delighted to be talking to you about this topic of perseverance. I just returned from leading a learning journey to South Africa, which is a country I've been to. That was my 14th visit. It's really the country of my heart that's taught me more about human capacity, the good and the bad, the dark and the light, than any other place I've ever worked. And as a result of that 2-week journey, where we met with a lot of women leaders primarily who are doing wonderful work within NGOs, within the government, at policy levels, at law courts, people who are working in the ghettos with young women who've been rescued from prostitution, a wide variety of people. And over again, I heard the same message, which I have been hearing in Australia, in Europe, and certainly in the US and Canada. The message, or the pattern, I guess is a better way to talk about it, the pattern that was so evident was that people are doing very good work. People are very smart, very committed, very dedicated at this point. And yet their good works go unrewarded in terms of having enough money to do the work, having enough time, having enough support from senior leaders. So coming off of that experience and having recently seen the same pattern in Australia and Europe, I feel that it's really important that we look at this topic of perseverance. Because how do we keep going when we're doing great work but we're not being funded, or our projects, our work, our research shows great results? We really have found answers to social problems, to big questions. We found answers that would really serve society and people, and yet we lose our funding, or through some very idiosyncratic, ego-based decision, legislation is changed, and all our years of hard work and patience have just been destroyed with the stroke of a pen or a computer key at this point. So let's talk about perseverance through this time. But first, I'd like you to look at the image of, which is the cover of my book, because it in itself tells a story. It was designed by a young New Orleanian artist who had to evacuate New Orleans after Katrina. She was separated from her family, and this image represents the day when she started to heal from that trauma. She took, if you look carefully, you could tell that the basis of this artwork is a cardboard box. You could see the folds and the creases in the upper right column, upper right side. So she worked with found materials to create this very beautiful piece of art. It's a cardboard box. Those were real blossoms that she found on the ground. And then the white is not paint. It's just tissue paper that she tore and layered, and then created the image with charcoal painting. So for me, this is a beautiful image of working with what we have to create what we need to do, or working with what we have and not looking elsewhere for resources in order to do the work that we know we must do. So I offer that image to you, but now I want to talk about what is going on in our world. This is a very important question for all of us to consider, because unless we look truthfully and realistically at all of the dynamics of this time, we can easily work ourselves to death. We can easily believe that if I just work harder, everything will work out better. And in fact, from my perception, which is global at this point, this is not the case. What's going on in the world right now is a series of very negative dynamics. So here are just a few of them. This is clearly the era when we're all feeling squeezed, that we don't have the amount of resources or even the amount of support from senior leaders that we used to have to do our work. Everyone is saying, well, I'm being asked to do more and more with less and less. We have fewer colleagues. We also have far less time to show the benefits of our work, and we have far less money. And that's just the way it is. It's not going to improve, probably in our lifetime at this point. And of course, everywhere now, we're witnessing violence, polarization, argumentation, and a real inability to make decisions that benefit people or that work for the long term. So if you just look at the European financial meltdown right now, they simply cannot get together on deciding what would work for the long term. The same is true in the U.S., the same is true in Australia, same is true in South Africa, and probably everywhere, that we polarize into positions, and we'd rather fight for our positions than collaborate together about what the future requires. And of course, this is also very evident in our personal relationships, in our communities. We've simply stopped wanting to reason together, and instead we're in this extremist stance where we just want our position to be the one that wins. And this, of course, creates more fear and anxiety. And we're living in a time when I believe, this is my personal political assessment, that fear is being used to control people. So instead of being thoughtful, we just are stirred up by current media to become very fearful. And when people are fearful, they surrender their power. This is the story of Europe. This is the story of dictatorships everywhere, that when people are willing to trade their sense of security because they're so afraid. When we're willing to trade our security, our freedom for our security, we end up, as Benjamin Franklin said, neither secure nor free. And then everyone's got someone else to blame for when things are going wrong. And this, for me, is very painful because we can never get to good decision making. We can never understand the complexity of a problem if all we're doing is try and point the finger at someone else and trying to get the spotlight off of us. How are we ever going to learn from experience if instead of sitting down and reasoning together, we just quickly want to say, well, it's his problem or it's her problem, and then no thinking goes on, no really problem solving that's worthy of the complexity of our problems happens. And then in the era of increasing bureaucracy and attempts to control people, there's increasing number of reports, measurements, protocols, standards, typologies, syndromes, many, many different ways of both narrowing our perception of what's going on and demanding that we spend more of our time on writing reports, evaluations. There's always new measures coming in instead of really understanding the complexity of the problem. I think you could see all of these trends that I've just put up, which I assume are rather depressing to see all at one time. I think they should be depressing. I was recently with a woman executive, by the way, who says she always cries in their board meetings, but instead of feeling guilty as a woman for crying, she says to the men, we all should be crying. It's really terrible what's going on. And I really like that perspective. But in terms of trying to take control of a world that is essentially uncontrollable, or trying to simplify cause and effect when in fact we're working with multiple causation and very complex systems. I look at all of these trends, the removal of resources, including time, which would be a wonderful resource to recapture, the increasing fear and conflict and denial of our problems, and then just having to use measures that we know do not accurately reflect anything important about the work that we've just done. I see all of these as attempts to control systems that are at this point inherently uncontrollable. And we are still trying to do good work in the midst of this, which is why I'm bringing this all up. I'm not intentionally trying to depress us, but I have learned from my own Buddhist teacher that when we're willing to look reality directly, truthfully, and see what's going on, that's when we can develop real courage and real capacity and real fearlessness. So for me, this is not about weighing us down with depressing information, but it's instead saying, this is the circumstance, this is the time in which we are trying to do good work. And once we face that reality, then we have the capacity to persevere. So I received this note from a CEO of a very large nonprofit in Houston, Texas, and this is how she described her leadership. I think it's a very poignant description, especially that, you know, the rock we just left disappears and we cannot see the shore. So this, for me, is a great description of what it feels like to be a leader in a time of groundlessness. Now, there are other ways of capturing the dynamics of this time, and this is one of my favorite ones right now. This is from probably the 1930s, but it's very relevant these days, isn't it? And then my son, who's 27, recently sent me this. Again, this is very funny, but in such a dark way. Well, these are the times, and So we have a choice, and I love this quote from Pema Chodron, that the whole globe is shook up, so what are you going to do when things are falling apart? You're either going to become more fundamentalist and try to hold things together, or you're going to forsake the old ambitions and goals and live life as an experiment, making it up as you go along. These are our choices for whatever work we're doing, wherever we're trying to serve, wherever we're trying to make a difference. Are we going to approach it with rigidity and just hold on to past beliefs, or are we going to forsake that and just live life as an experiment? Now, this is a question of identity. So this is just about my favorite question to ask us these days. Who do we choose to be for this time? Do we choose to just hunker down and pretend that nothing important is really happening, or, well, we've been here before, so I'll just go on with my work in the old ways? Or do we choose to be one who fully encounters reality and makes a choice based on accurate information about how difficult it is, about how bad it is? Many years ago, Rudolf Barrow, who was a great iconoclastic green activist in Germany, said this, and I have found this to be very true. When an old culture is dying, the new culture is only born from a few people who are not afraid to be insecure. Those of us who have developed expertise may find the choice of being insecure difficult. You know, we grew up, we were rewarded from certainty, from knowing our field, from knowing what needs to happen. But this kind of insecurity that I think Rudolf Barrow is speaking of is the insecurity of doing what you can to make a difference, all the while realizing that it may not make a difference, but that it's still the right work for you to be doing. Now, that's a profound statement. I hope that you'll spend some time thinking about your own ability to face the insecurity of knowing what work is yours, but perhaps also realizing that it may not lead to much. It may not lead to the kind of change that you're so focused on creating. In terms of Pema Chodron's choice that we can be fundamentalist or live life as an experiment, I recently heard Randy Olson, a scientist, say this: if you're not making it up as you go along, you're out of touch with reality, because reality is changing all the time. So we really have no choice but to live life as an experiment. Now, drawing on a completely different tradition, in 2000, the Hopi elders, the Hopi Nation is a tribe of Native Americans, Indians, in the southwest of the U.S., so in Arizona and New Mexico are their tribal lands. And their stewardship, their purpose as a nation is to take care of the earth. This is a very difficult stewardship to hold at this point when we seem so intent on destroying the mother planet. And in 2000, they issued a prophecy from their nation to describe this time. See what you think about this. Here is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid, who will try to hold on to the shore. They are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know that the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, and keep our heads above water. Right there, I think, is such a provocative description of this time. And in fact, I based my whole book, Perseverance, around this prophecy. There's more to come, but if we can linger for a moment on this page. They're describing this time as a river whose velocity creates fear in us. And a natural response when you're facing a rushing river is to hold on to the shore, really hold on to our old ways. But they prophesy that those who do hold on to the shore will be the ones who are torn apart and suffer greatly. So there's a choice of who I choose to be for this time here. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, and keep our heads above water. Can we be those who are willing to face the currents, face the reality, and also push off into the middle of the shore, river, I think, so we can be of service to people who are afraid. So here's their continuing prophecy of how we behave. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing seriously, least of all ourselves. For the moment we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. Well, there's some directions. There's actually a typo on this page. It's we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. And this, for me, is a key point to perseverance. So I want to talk about how we stay in the middle of the river and persevere so that we might be of service to others and not take things so personally. So the Chinese character for perseverance is extremely provocative for me because it's a knife suspended over a heart. Now, there are many possible interpretations of this, but for me, as I've worked with it now for a few years, it really feels to me like any time we are set on achieving something, our hearts are open, we're doing the work we choose to be doing, we think it will be of value, there's always this knife hanging over us. We might suddenly lose our funding. That's a good knife. We might suddenly be overcome by anger or resentment. We might be overwhelmed by fatigue and exhaustion. So the path of the open heart, as I interpret this, is that there's always the possibility of being cut open. Now, another person, a Zen priest, told me, well, her interpretation is that as we do our work out in the world, our work of service for others, the difficulty of it, the knife edge, cuts us open and creates a more open, compassionate being. I like that one too. Now, going back to the question of who do I choose to be for this time, perseverance is a choice. I received this little text message from a CEO who was sitting in a terrible meeting where everything that she valued was being discounted. And she sent me this little SMS that said, every day I make a choice not to give up. And I believe that is something that I personally experience, maybe not every day, but frequently I have to recommit to the path that I've chosen, especially when I meet with setbacks or rebuttals or whatever. So it is a choice. It's a consciousness that we take on for ourselves. And it's clear that people throughout history who persevere have learned how to deal with the hardest stuff, the criticism, the anger, the failures that are bound to happen because it's just life, and the anxiety and stress that come over us as we're on this path of trying to do good work in a time when we feel less and less appreciated for that good work, perhaps. So I would like now to give you a little time to think about some questions, because I'm curious about how these times, as I've described them, may or may not be affecting you. So here's one way to see if you're being affected by these difficult times. The first question is, how meaningful does your work feel to you right now? What I'm going to do is I'm going to put up 6 questions, and then I'm actually going to give you a minute or two to notice which one feels the most important for you to think about. And of course you can't think about it right now, but I hope you'll make a note and use it maybe as a conversation starter with yourself or with someone close to you. So here are the 6. So the first is, how meaningful does your work feel? What's happening to your relationships right now? Are they getting better? Are you more frustrated because you don't have time to spend with people you love and care about? But what's the quality of your relationships now? And what's happening around criticism? Are you becoming more critical of people, and are people more critical of you? This is my own little benchmark for when I need to take time out, when I start to get really critical of other people. How easily do you become triggered? By this I mean, how easily do you become angry or resentful, or somebody says something and you're just suddenly really angry at them, or something happens, you read a newspaper report or you watch something on television and suddenly you're enraged, or feeling deeply frustrated or whatever. But triggers is meant here of what provokes you, what provokes a strong emotional reaction in you. And what's your level of stress right now? Is it higher than it was a few years ago? Is it getting better? And finally, what practice do you have to maintain peace? So we're just going to take a minute for you to notice which one of these questions, and you only get to choose one, which one would be worthy of writing down and carrying out of this webinar and have a conversation with yourself or with someone that you love. So I'm just going to be silent for a minute. All right. I hope you will carry that question forward in your day or in your week. And now I'd just like to talk very specifically about how we deal with a few of these issues. So the first one is criticism. Criticism is to be expected, and the reason I say that with such confidence is I encountered this wisdom from the Buddha from 2,500 years ago, who said that this has been going on through the ages. They criticize the silent ones, they criticize the talkative ones, they criticize the moderate ones. There is no one in the world who escapes criticism. There never was and never will be, nor is there now, the wholly criticized or the wholly approved. Now we're doing our work in an era of intense instant judgment. How many times when you're on the web do you encounter a thumbs up icon? It's driving me crazy. We're asked for our opinion about everything. If you read an article, was it useful? If someone made a comment, was it useful? We're into this instant like, dislike, and just spitting out our judgments in little text boxes. And that's just the most obvious way to notice that this is an era of instant judgments. It's on talk shows, it's on talk radio, it's in the newspaper. We've created a whole culture that feels, where individuals feel it's okay to criticize everyone. Now, when you're trying to do good work and your work is complex, this era of instant judgments about your work doesn't serve anything. It doesn't serve society, it doesn't serve you, and it doesn't serve the future. So that's why I go back to this 2,500-year-old wisdom of the Buddha, because criticism is normal in human interactions, but in our particular 21st century internet-based culture, it's become a real liability. And so you, as you do your work, I think it's really important to have a kind of faith in yourself, a kind of a real quality of understanding what you're trying to do and who you are so that you can trust yourself in the midst of receiving a lot of incidental, casual criticism. Some criticism is really valid, but a lot of what's going on these days is just pure garbage and noise. Now, in this era of blame and denial and pushing problems under the rug or out of the way, I'd like you to contemplate this question. How do you react when something goes wrong? This little bird is a blue-footed booby from the Galapagos Islands, but a great image for me of how I feel some of the time and how some of us feel a lot of the time. So how do you react when something goes wrong? When you make a mistake or you're genuinely criticized for something that you did that wasn't good, what do you do? Well, there are different choices. You can scapegoat, you can cover it up, you can deny that it was really a problem, or you can learn from it. Now, it's only the last one that gives us capacity for the future. And what's one of the most disheartening trends that I've noticed everywhere is we no longer take time to learn. We no longer take time to learn from experience. I'm not talking about abstract learning of new ideas or new concepts. It's that we're doing things, and instead of sitting down and actually learning from the experience like we used to do in the past, and if you're lucky, you're still doing it with your colleagues, but I find it's very, very rare these days. But when we do learn from experience, of course, that's the only way we grow and develop and become smarter. We also become more cohesive as a group of colleagues if we can actually probe into our experience without trying to assign blame and really get into the complexity of what happens so that we all become smarter. This is perhaps the simplest way we could start working well together again as colleagues, would be when something goes wrong to gather everyone together who had anything to do with that incident or crisis or problem and really probe what went on here. What do we all think went on here? Not to assign blame, not to come up with a report that nobody will pay attention to, but to really be focused on learning from this so we don't do it again. I worked for one corporation, FedEx, that said our motto is, I don't know if it still is, but our motto is, we get it right the second time. And I think that is a brilliant statement. So for those of you who don't know me, this is how I look when I'm inside the mouth of a hippopotamus. But the question is important. How do you respond to aggression? In this day and age, when there is so much aggressive energy, whether you're driving or in a crowd or in a shop or in a meeting, the people just go at each other. Very self-protective, very defensive. So how do you respond to aggression? The Dalai Lama said something that is, of course, profound, that aggression isn't solved with aggression. Aggression is only solved with peace. And I've recently learned from my own teacher that when you encounter someone whose behavior is aggressive, to respond with a different behavior, to just be calm, to be open, to stay friendly, is actually one way of teaching that person that a different response is available. And I have a personal commitment in my own work right now, which is I monitor my behavior because I do not want to add to the aggression and anxiety that's out in the world. So by how I am, by what I say, by how I interact with people, I'm trying to watch and see if I cannot respond to aggression with aggression, if I cannot respond to anxiety with just more anxiety. And I'm finding this to be a very lovely practice, actually, to just keep watching when I am able to meet aggression with calmness or with openness or with generosity. And it turns out that it works quite well for a number of colleagues, not all, but a number of people respond to that. And we're just showing them, we're modeling that a different way of being is possible. Now, you can't do any of these changes, like responding to watching yourself to notice if you're being too aggressive, or watching how you respond to criticism, or being able to learn together with colleagues. You can't do any of this if you don't have a personal practice of reflection. So how often do you take time to reflect? Do you take any time to reflect? And if not, where could you take some time? So some people have told me they turn off the radio in the car and they just create real quiet space for themselves as they're driving to and from work. Other people put on some very quiet music that instantly signals to their whole being that, okay, now we're just going to get calm and we're going to reflect. But I think you really need to notice when in your life you're able, maybe it's walking the dog, maybe it's just going for a long walk, but when are you finding time to reflect on everything? Because one of the really important things to notice here is that people and teams of people who find time to reflect together actually develop the capacity to withstand a lot of pressures. They feel they have reclaimed time, that they get their work done. And by the way, they like each other more because they've spent time in reflection. So time to reflect personally and with colleagues, again, is the simplest way to feel that we're back in control of this very crazy, frantic pace of life. It's quite miraculous what happens to people who have regular reflective practice. They actually come to feel that they are in control of time rather than time controlling them. So all of this is part of this question is, how are you strengthening yourself for the challenges yet to come? I mean, if any of you feel it's going to get easier from here on out, then you can ignore this question. But if you feel, as I do, that things are escalating, that the fear and anxiety and polarization are increasing, that there won't be more money and resources, then the question is, what are you personally doing to protect your health and well-being? Not for selfish reasons. This is not about being selfish at all. It's about taking care of ourselves so that we can stay, so we can be available, so that we can remain someone who's of service. As more and more people are clinging to the shore, we can be the people who've learned how to stay in the middle of the river. And of course, the big skill here, the large capacity, is knowing that we carry peace within us. So this question is important to contemplate. How often and when and where do you ever feel feelings of real peace, centeredness, groundedness, a connection with life, a sense that it's really okay, even if it's, you know, falling apart around you? But that quality of, that I'm calling peace here, but it has all those dimensions of feeling connected, feeling home, feeling okay. How often do you know that? Now, I'm assuming that all of us are still very focused on creating a better future for this planet, for our children, for people everywhere. That's what I've assumed throughout. And so the great American historian Howard Zinn, who died last year, said this, that we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think how human beings should live in defiance of all that is bad around us is itself a marvelous victory. My newest book is called Walk Out, Walk On, and it's a series of learning journeys into communities that we describe as daring to live the future now. So how we are together in our day-to-day interactions, how we are at home, how we are with our partners, loved ones, how we are with strangers, is how we are giving birth to the future now. And I think it's very important to notice that the future, a more desirable future, cannot happen until we ourselves are living the future that we want right now. So let's go back to the Hopi quote. This is the last part of it. So I'll go back here. So I say, see who is there with you and celebrate at this time in history. We are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration, for we are the ones we have been waiting for. This is our choice. I hope that you will at least contemplate this choice, because the world really needs more and more of us to be people who are willing to persevere no matter what the content of our work. But how we do that work in this very difficult time is what I hope I have provoked some thinking about in this webinar. And now we'll have about 15 minutes for questions.
Hey, Meg, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I do need to say that the last 2 or 3 days I've needed some personal renewal of myself, and I happened to read your book for the last 2 or 3 days, and it was very helpful and very profound for my life. So thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome.
So Ashley and I have been collecting some questions, and I'll ask a few of those. We have about 10 minutes, and then we need about 5 minutes for some wrap-up. But here's a question from one of our listeners. Using the metaphor of the river, how can you persevere when you're being swept downstream? Isn't perseverance also a matter of choosing things to hold on to?
Well, that's a really good question.
Yeah, it is.
I think what we hold on to is not things. So it's not the shore. What we hold on to is our values, our convictions, our sense of what we believe in. And we will be taken by the current of events. It's impossible not to. But it's the way I see it is that as we are moving with the river, we are kept current, that we are there where we need to be because other people are being swept and events are being swept down by the river. So the real task is how you keep your head above water. And that, I think, is knowing what you're committed to, knowing your values, and knowing who you choose to be.
Okay, thank you. Here's another one. Why, and I'm interested in this as well, why are some leaders capable of remaining resilient while others are not? Is it a sense of meaning and purpose? Is that the answer?
I think that's very clearly that. It's certainly the leaders who are resilient are not the ones who have big egos. They're the ones who really know, again, what they're about, what they're committed to. They have a strong sense of values that are very inclusive and supportive. They know that their job as leader is not to, command and control people, but instead to find ways to engage and invite people into the work and to really care about people as human beings. Those are the only leaders I see who are truly resilient, and that may just be the bias that I hold. But I think leaders who are competitive, who are trying to be number one, who go all out to succeed and win at all costs, they're not resilient. So if you look at any leader you know who you would say is resilient, I would say just look at their values and look at who they are as a fully integrated, authentic person. And then you could answer the question yourself.
How do you think we do in teaching these up-and-coming leaders in our MBA programs and so forth? Do we teach those kinds of things you're talking about, or do we lean towards generally more of the competitive? What do you think?
Are you asking me what is or what I would like? Because what is we're teaching too many MBAs to make quick, snap judgments through the case study approach. We're teaching them a lot of numeric manipulation skills called finance, even planning, budgeting. And we're not teaching them the art of leadership at all. And it's been very distressing to observe this for about 10 years or so.
Okay. I agree, actually. There is a question from, I know many of the listeners have read some of your previous books, and this one relates to, this person is asking, what connections do you see with leadership in the new science, and then the elements of perseverance that you've talked about?
Well, I think the one big connection I would make is with work both in quantum theory, with that the essential unit of the universe is relationships, and it's also context, where those relationships occur. And then a second big, easy to make connection is between times of chaos and the value of meaning as the strange attractor that creates coherence among very disparate behaviors. But the third part of it is that life is about change, and our attempts to control it or to think that it's a mechanical being that we can find the right switches to turn on and off. The new science is so clear about life is continuous creativity and change. So put those three together, how we get through chaos, through meaning and values that bring us together, the importance of relationships because community is the solution to any problem we face, and the realization that life is about change and let's stop fighting it. So I feel of course, there's a lot of coherence inside me, but that's where I would take it.
Okay, I know at least one of your slides talked about criticism, and this question relates to that. How do you separate valid criticism from instant critical judgments so that you don't go down the wrong path and fail the course to, correct the course that's really needed?
And this is where I think we need a good friend to talk to, I mean, I certainly don't want us to dismiss all feedback, but to be able to sort out what's useful and what's not, I find personally takes, it's better if I'm talking with a good friend, someone who cares about me and can help put things in perspective.
Okay. Oh, good question that just came in. And this relates to the piece really near the end on reflection and the importance of reflection. I know I talk about that as well too, but that's a challenge. And this question says, what novel ways can a group of people or a team use to create, in quotation marks, a time to reflect, as Meg is mentioning on her webinar?
Yeah, there are a lot of these. So the one thing is, don't expect to do it at the end of a regular staff meeting. It doesn't work. Unless you're a really good team. Some teams that are well experienced with each other do it at the beginning of a meeting. Like they'll spend 20 minutes reflecting on a poem that someone brought in. And I'm talking right now about a DuPont chemical plant where I saw this happening. Or someone bringing in a thought for the day, and you spend 20 minutes reflecting on that before you go into the meeting. But the ones that I prefer are to find time maybe at the end of the week for an hour's worth of reflection, like what did we learn this week? What happened this week that we could learn from? Some teams spend, every month they'll spend an afternoon. Some organizations I've been in, teams again. This is usually the work of a very forward-thinking leader, and they'll meet quarterly for a full day. So you have to carve the time out. And of course, the first thing is that people say, well, we don't have time for this. And then you say, exactly my point. And once you start this, it's amazing how powerful it is for people, and people don't want to let go of it because it really does give us the ability to manage the craziness of life in a very different way.
And we have about 1 more minute, but there's actually a couple more questions that came in about reflection, and one of them specifically says, do you know of any resources or studies on this reflection and ideas for that? Do you know any resources that are out there?
Oh, that's the kind of question that I think it doesn't have to be that hard. You just have to have the guts to start it and to do it in an informal way. I mean, there are lots of resources. I think Parker Palmer's Learning to Teach and now Learning to Lead process is very well documented. That's Parker Palmer, one of our former.
The Courage to Teach? Are you talking the Courage to Teach? Yeah, okay.
Right. That's a whole program, but it doesn't need to be that complicated. It can really be just create an informal gathering with your colleagues and just talk about whatever needs to be talked about and just use a good conversational process. So I would suggest if you want a good conversational process, one of the places to start is to go to Christina Baldwin's newest book called The Circle Way. But you can also go on websites. Her website is called Pure Spirit, P-E-E-R, spirit.com, and she has a whole circle guide for hosting conversations. So the resources are out there. It actually just requires a little courage to start this because it is anti-cultural.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Meg, for taking the time to be with us today. As you know, I've read most of your books, and including this last one this last weekend, and have gained so much insight and reflective experiences myself from that. So this was an excellent webinar. Now I'd like to have Ashley. I know that you had some winners of the book giveaway. Can you announce those?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I'd like to announce the winners of the book giveaway. The following individuals have won a copy of Meg's Perseverance, her new book. Kathy V. from Kenya, Lydia from Slovenia, Robbie from New Hampshire, and Patricia from Colorado.
Thank you, Ashley. So if you have enjoyed today's webinar, I hope you will also be able to join us for future installments of the Leadership Perspectives webinar series. For example, on December 7th, which is coming up next week, I believe, there will be a webinar titled Showing Leadership in a Crisis, Blood on the Floor or Name Adored. And so for more information on this webinar and others, you can go to the ILA website. So again, thanks to everyone for joining us, and thanks to Meg, and have a wonderful week.